Hello, hello, and welcome to Journey to SEA 2025. This is Shellyan Edwards Barron, your creative writing specialist here to talk all things reports, narratives, and comprehension. Thank you so much for those of you who are joining the live. I appreciate you immensely. Please feel free to ask questions, make comments, let me know if anything I'm saying you want further clarification on. You can message me during the live or you can send me notes afterward. You can find me on Facebook, Shelly Ann Edwards Barron, or in SEA, The Peacefield Approach. You can message me there as well. If you're looking at it on YouTube, you can comment on the YouTube post. And I do check in from time to time to see comments and respond as necessary. And if this is your first live, welcome. We are wrapping up and talking about all things reports, narratives, comprehension, as I said, and we're going through in step by step detail. If you haven't already downloaded the schedule, send me a message and I'll make sure you get a copy. It's also on my website, woodcoach.com. You can go Journey to SEA 2025. There's a tab there. And to the right column, if you go down just a little bit, or I think it's at the top. Yeah, it's at the top. You can get the schedule to download. So you know what we're doing step by step, so that you can follow along and make sure you're getting the most out of each session. And so, just a little bit about me, just in case this is your first live. I am a creative writing specialist. I call myself a specialist because I look at creative writing from many different perspectives, from the perspective of the writer, from the teacher looking at the writing, as well as from the perspective of an editor who is looking at other people's writing to develop them and to make them, make it more reader friendly. So I am a professional editor and I do work with people who are working on their novels, and I work primarily with nonfiction, but I do also check in with novels as well from time to time. So if it is that you're thinking about how to get a fresh view and a really detailed look at creative writing, then you're in the right place. And of course, we're dealing with comprehension as well, simply because comprehension is like the other side of writing. So as a writer, you're producing, and as the reader, you are consuming. And so, reading and writing are so intertwined that as we learn about writing, we're also very poised to learn about comprehension, which is why I'm also covering comprehension. So, today's session, let me get my slides ready. And yeah, I think I figured it out so that we don't have any moving slides today. All right, so I got it. Yay! Yay me. So today we're talking about passive voice. Again, we started last week. So if you missed last week's session, you can go back and get that foundation for passive voice. We're talking about lessons learned, which comes after the climax and falling action. And we're also looking at poetry questions. So if you want to look at poetry in general and some background details on poetry, then that's last week's session. In this week's session, we're going to look more closely at the questions in poetry. All right. So let's get started. Ooh, before. Yeah, that's why I do the slides so I won't forget. Um, this week, Friday, the 28th, is when results for SEA 2024 are going to be out. And I know we are preparing for SEA 2025, but I have quite a few students who worked with me heading into SEA. And like most parents and teachers at this time, the anxiety is a little bit there. And for those of you who have been following the live, you know that for me, when I say anxiety is a little bit there, I mean a whole lot there. And so I wanted to pause just to remind you guys of something, because I know even while you are preparing for SEA 2025, you are anticipating all of the work going into it, all of the anxiety and the stress and all of that. And you may actually be feeling a little bit stressed right now. So, from time to time, this is something that I come back to very often. and it's something that I use all the time because of the anxiety that I work with. So I did it this morning, I did it yesterday, and I've been doing a lot of deep breathing in between, to help reduce the heart rate and calm myself down. And as it says, to calm my mind and refocus my thoughts. That is what this grounding technique is. And it's not something that is specific to this context of SEA. It can be applied to every situation where you're having a bit of anxiety and you want to be able to calm the anxiety. This is something that I do quite regularly. So I'm just going to talk you through it. It takes 5 minutes or less to go through. Most times when the anxiety is really strong, I do it back to back, like 3, 4 times, one after the other. But I'll just talk you through it so that you'd have an idea of what it is if it's new to you. And if is not new to you, then it's a good time to actually practice it. Take a deep breath going into the session today and to remind yourself that, hey, it's going to be okay. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is just as it says. And notice the graphics. This is something that I do with my students when they're getting into exam as well, so that they can have this strategy. They can use it anytime to really calm themselves. Because, like I said, it takes less than 5 minutes to do, probably 2 minutes if you really check the time from beginning to end. So, the way it's done is that you would name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And what I do is to incorporate a bit of deep breathing in between all of it. So to begin, inhale deeply through your nose and exhale through mouth. So just like just doing that, you can actually feel your body beginning to calm. And so, what the practice does is that it takes you out of your mind and into the tangible space. And that way, you're able to, slow the thoughts and calm your thoughts and refocus. And then you're able to move forward. So, deep breath in. 5 things you can see. And I just look around. So, I'm seeing my phone, my notebook, my pen, the keyboard, and the mouse. And then another deep breath. 4 things I can touch. Well, I can touch the chair, I'm touching the floor, touch the fan next to me, and the remote. Deep breath in and out again. 3 things that I can hear. I can hear the sound of my own voice. I'm hearing dogs barking and cars passing in the road. Deep breath in and out again. 2 things that I can smell. Someone's burning something, so I'm smelling a bit of smoke. And then I'm also smelling the disinfectant that I mopped with recently. Deep breath in and out. 1 thing that I can taste, breakfast. Lots of different tastes in that, but yeah, breakfast. So, and then one more deep breath in and out to close it off. And that's it. Now, of course, you'd be saying all of those things in your mind. You're not saying it out loud. And when you can, you actually want to reach out and touch the things that are near you that you can physically feel that sensation. So it's going to be as multisensory as possible. And then when you think of the sounds, you name them. And the key really is to speak the name of things. So things that you can see. So you don't just look at it and point it out visually, you want to name it as well in your mind. So, cell phone, mouse, keyboard, those kinds of things. And by the time you're going through that, your mind has already started refocusing from the negative thoughts and from the anxiety. And like I said, when the anxiety is pretty strong, I do that, let's say about 3 times back to back. The deep breathing really helps, and then I could get up and do what I need to do. So I hope that is helpful to you, and definitely use it as often as you need. There are other grounding techniques. This is the one that I find most useful. It's very practical and it helps me tremendously. So I wanted to remind you of that for those who knew and to let you know for those who are new to this. And you can definitely teach it to your students, your kids. Oh, a student told me, Miss, I'm not a kid. A kid is a young goat. She said, I'm a child. So I have to learn to say child and children. I know the Americans say kids, and I watch a lot of American TV with that. So all right, so a little lightheartedness to get into. They helped me calm my anxiety doing this. When I first started doing these lives, oh man, I used to do that like, almost wanted to hyperventilate, especially when there was a glitch or something misspelt or went wrong. It was like, but I think I'm getting better. I'm getting better. Okay, so refocus. Starting with report writing as we usually do. And this week we're talking about choosing passive voice. So last week we spoke about what passive voice is, what it looks like, and a little bit into what it's normally used for, how it's used in a report. And so I want to kind of lean into that a little bit more this week so that we can look at exactly how passive voice can be used in reports to help students really maximize their formal tone and minimize the opinions, because remember, opinions can really sneak into a report, huh? And they come up in places where students want to add adjectives. And I had one student tell me, Miss, I want to make the report exciting. I had to remind him the purpose of a report is not to be exciting. It is not to really get readers' emotions going. It's not about that at all, which is why one of the first things that we did, and I always do with my students, and I repeat often, what is the purpose of a report? And the whole point of a report is to share information in a way that removes you as a writer and your personal bias or influence. And you want to share information that the reader might need to make a decision or to take an action. And so we don't want to sort of persuade the reader by what we might say, outright or inadvertently. It's really just to give the details. And so we really want to pay attention to the fact that that is the purpose of a report. We're not trying to make it exciting. If the report is boring, then so be it. A report is for the purpose of sharing information, and it's worth remembering over and over. And passive voice is one of the ways that gets that done. We also spoke about reported speech. That is another way to make sure the tone is as formal as possible and you get the details across. All right, so choosing passive voice, what do we do? Um, we want to think about using passive voice when the agent is unknown, when the action is accidental, and we really want to avoid laying blame. And when we want to avoid using names and pronouns, we can use passive voice as well. Because, of course, if you remember, passive voice is rewriting the sentence in a way that removes the subject from the sentence. So when you remove the subject from the sentence, you're able to focus on the action, what was done, which is extremely important in a report. But of course, if you have one person or one agent, and that's what agent means here, the person doing the action, if the agent is unknown, or if it is like maybe an inanimate object or something like that, then you might not want to name it. And definitely, if the situation was an accident, to avoid saying and laying blame on one of the participants, we might want to use passive voice. And then, of course, with the names and pronouns, we do want to make sure that we reduce the number of pronouns that we use. We're not eliminating them because the English language uses pronouns to make it flow effectively. So you can use pronouns. However, you don't want to use too many personal pronouns, especially because that could reduce the formal tone. Passive voice is one way to avoid that. And of course, you don't want to keep repeating names over and over and over, because again, that could make the writing sound a bit less sophisticated, less formal, and lower in level than the level that you're aiming for with the formal tone. So passive voice is a way to deal with that as well. So let's look at a couple of examples. Well, one example each. Um, so in a case like this, I remember there was a report prompt. I believe it would have been the 2022 report prompt where um, students were playing in a classroom and the bulb in the classroom broke. Now, if you observed a situation like that and you didn't see who broke the bulb or what exactly transpired, all you know is that they were playing, and next thing you know, um, the ball. They say they're playing with a ball in the classroom. Next thing you know, ball hits light bulb and it breaks, right? And the bulb was broken in the process. So in a case like that, we don't want to say the ball broke the bulb because that could borderline sound like personification, and as if the bulb the ball was an active participant and it knew what it was doing. So you can simply say the bulb was broken in the process. So the ball collided with, so we know it just hit, and the bulb was broken in the process. So we're not saying the bulb broke the light bulb. So we want to be really careful about these really subtle ways that the emotions and opinions and, um, the figurative language can kind of sneak into a report. So we want to use passive voice. We can in in a situation like that. So if you don't know who did it, so you didn't see who kicked the ball at the time, and you're not sure exactly what transpired, but you know the bulb was broken, then that's what you focus on, the action. If you only saw the ball hit the light bulb and that then the bulb broke, then that's what you see, not that the bulb broke the light bulb, right? So we want to make sure students get that understanding and be able to separate that information. So that's when we don't know the agent, or the agent is not not a person. And this is another example here with that. So the action itself is more important, and that's what we want to focus on. So Elizabeth was running, she fell, she collided with the floor, and her ankle broke. Similar concept. Well, she sprained her ankle. Um, so we want to, you know, say what we saw. And in a case like this, we might also want to follow up with this, that Elizabeth um, claimed, and those kinds of things, because we know what we saw. I should probably change this, Elizabeth ankle swole when she fell. So can we see the sprain? So while I'm saying it, I'm thinking, we really need to be careful. Can we say for sure? Did we see the sprain itself? We can make that as a conclusion rather than stating it like this. Um, but we don't want to say things like Elizabeth sprained her ankle. It kind of sounds like she did it on purpose. Um, we don't want to say, the floor sprained her ankle, because again, are we blaming the floor? Um, is the ground a suspect? So that these are the kinds of things that students would eventually need to be thinking about. And it might be a little bit challenging for them to have to go through all of these processes and think about it if they don't understand about passive voice and how they can reword things, and how the opinions and details can be written differently to avoid ambiguity and making things sound kind of strange in their report. So as you're going through passive voice with them, think about that as well. And you notice that even when I did it, when I was quickly doing up the example, Elizabeth's ankle was sprained when she fell. That's a kind of summary statement, and it's something that I always tell students to think about. But it comes so naturally to us, even teachers. And so as we're going through it, it's good to make the change. And so let me stop share. I'm going to make a change, and then we'll see. Um, let's just add in the word claim. All right. And I think that would, yep, that would solve that problem there. And so when we make that change, so when we say claimed, what we're doing is introducing some reported speech as well. And so um, that would be, and we could probably say indicated instead of claimed, because claimed has some connotations as well. And so I'm going through all of these processes out loud so that you guys can see some of the decisions students have to make when they're writing the reports. And so it's often a pretty good idea to have students, when you're discussing it with the students, you're kind of like modeling it, right? And you're making sure that the student can go through the process and go through the thinking and have that ability to understand why and how they're making some of the decisions. And that's the kind of thing you want to be able to impart so that a student on their own would be able to go through, okay, I can't use this word or I shouldn't use this word because it has this subtle meaning. This is a better word to use here, um, and so on. So Elizabeth indicated her ankle was sprained when she fell. So now she is telling us this so that we cover all our bases. So she's not saying she sprained her ankle. We could also probably um, reduce this and say her ankle was sprained during the fall to reduce that pronoun there, she. That might be a little bit complex, but it's possible. And so these are, again, some of the things that students have to be mindful of and think about as they are writing. So let's look at the final example here. Let's say you have a situation where the student is using names over and over, like every sentence is beginning with a name. Now, remember, one of the things with the reports and with writing, creative writing for SEA, is that examiners wanted to see a variety of sentence structures. So, using passive voice is introducing a particular sentence structure that allows for more objectivity and focus on the action rather than identifying a name of someone all the time. And so, using passive voice like that allows you to have that variety in sentence structure and not have every sentence begin with a name, right? So instead of saying Mrs. Henry asked the students, we can say the students were asked. And this would, of course, be part of a paragraph where Mrs. Henry might have been named as the person already giving instructions so that we don't leave the readers wondering who asked them. We know this because of information previously given in that paragraph, but this is one option. Same thing with the other sentence. Officer Nanlal questioned the driver. The driver was questioned. Now, if you want to make sure that we know who the person was who questioned the driver, you can always keep the subject at the end and say the driver was questioned by Officer Nandlal. So that's still passive voice, but it changes the structure of the sentence and allows for variety in the sentence format, which would mean that not every sentence would be the same way, not every sentence would have the same format. And that allows for better reading, it increases the formality, and it introduces a variety in sentence structure, which is actually one of the requirements for the report writing. So, as we're here, and this is the end of the review for the reports, I think you know what I need to do is to put in a slide where we do those 30 minutes when you get your, advice for the week. So I'll add that in next session. Yeah, these things, I think about these things as I'm going. I'm always looking for ways to provide resources and improve the presentation so that it will be as easy as possible for you to follow, and therefore you'd get the maximum benefit from the sessions that I'm doing. Um, so, all right, this week we're continuing with passive voice. So if you're just starting with passive voice, then definitely you want to make sure students know what it is, what it looks like. So you want a few examples, and that's what you're discussing first session. Second session, you do some practice in terms of identifying it and creating their own, and then give them a paragraph. That would be third session for them to write within context passive voice. If you've already done that and you're working along with the program, with the lives, the sequence of sessions, then this week what you're looking at is going more closely into why it is used and instances where it can be used in report writing. And so you want to identify situations and brainstorm sentences about the different situations. So you're looking at all the different types of reports. So incident, accident, competition, activity, and event. Those are the five basic types of reports. And you're looking at the, different scenarios. So you might want to work with some prompts and what can be said in this section. Remember, we're doing 5 paragraphs. So you're looking at each paragraph and you're looking at, okay, what can be done, um, what actions, which one of these would be best for passive voice, and which ones would work best active voice. So we're still looking at choosing between active and passive. And so in this case, if you are looking for some activities like that, remember I have my textbook. It is there's a whole lesson on active and passive voice, and then there's the journal and the workbook where you get practice activities here with answers. So if you're not sure about how to go about doing that, there's guidance. And so what we want to do then is 3 sessions. Remember, we're trying to revisit this 3 sessions. We're looking at the first session, quick review, what is passive voice, what it looks like, go through a couple of examples. Second session, we're looking at, let's say, maybe 2 to 3 types of reports, or okay, in half an hour, we could do each in 15 minutes, so 2. And then third session, you do another 2. The 2 I would recommend, first session, when you're looking at what situations you could use passive voice in, incident and accident, because they're very similar and some of the details can overlap in terms of how you would present details. And then in the second session where you're looking at details and so on, I would recommend activity and event because, again, some would overlap in terms of the kinds of details that would be shared. So, first session, reminder, maybe do some writing conversions of sentences. And then the next 2 sessions, you're looking specifically at um, passive voice within the context of incidents and accidents. That's the second one. And the third one, you're looking at passive voice in the context of um, events and the activities. All right, so remember we're doing like focused development here. So we're not necessarily writing any full reports at this point. What we might do is to do a paragraph or do like maybe choose like the third or fourth paragraph and look at that. Directly focus on that, decide whichever section you want to work on. And so this is like the second week of reports and passive voice. So what you're doing is that you're building on the students' understanding and giving them more practice within context. And so that's the agenda for this week, making sure they know what passive voice is, repeating. And remember again, what I said was that this is like foundation. We do back to back repetition. And then when we finish with all the major concepts, we're going to repeat this again within the context of writing, more full reports. All right. So that's it for reports. Now let's shift our attention to the narrative writing. And with narrative writing, now we're looking at the lesson learned. So we're pretty much at the end of the plot in terms of the sequencing of the plot. We began with, you know, rising action. We looked at hooks, the context, introductions. Then we looked at that intervention and climax situation. We looked at falling action. And then finally, we're looking at the lessons learned. And so once we're finished with this, the next thing we're going to be doing some spot checks with characters and setting and so on. But for now, we want to make sure students understand the plot itself. And so let's take a quick look at what the lessons learned have to do with narratives and why students really do need to have one. Um, so the lesson learned really focuses on what the main character has gained from the experience. Remember, a narrative is not about writing a whole bunch of stuff and um, like the life, a snippet from the person's life kind of thing. It's really a very micro focus on a specific incident. And the reason the writer is focusing and having this micro focus on this specific incident is because you want to share a point. And that point is that lesson that the main character would learn from the experience. Now, you could share it to say, well, okay, this is what happened to me and this is what I learned. But of course, ultimately, you're sharing these personal narratives. That's when we go first person. We're sharing this to help readers. And if we're going with the straight narrative where we're writing about someone else in third person, why are we telling readers about this particular incident that this person experienced? Yes, we're sharing it in an entertaining way, but a narrative has an ultimate point. We do have a moral to the story to share. And so this is something that we want to make sure the writers understand. So students need to understand that I'm not just writing this to entertain the examiner. I am writing this to share a point, and so there must be a lesson learned. And that lesson learned is the main character's lesson. So the story is never really a situation, especially if you're writing first person, it's never a situation where you're observing things happening to other people and then that other person learns a lesson. Things must happen to you as a writer when you're writing first person. That's I am involved. And then you learn a lesson from the experience that you had. If you're writing third person, like you're writing about someone else, like, George, Henry, Christine, Agatha. You don't ask me where I get these names from. That was just in my head. I guess I was thinking, I was reading something about mystery writing earlier, and I guess Agatha Christie came to mind. For those of you who don't know, you'd have to look that up, right? um, but we want the main character to really be the one who we're following through the experience, and therefore that is the person who's going to be learning the lesson. So, what is this lesson learned about? So, one, focus on the main character. Two, it has to be the result of the experiences. And three, it is connected to the introduction. And so when we write introductions, and this is one of the reasons why you want to go through the whole plot with students before they really begin writing complete essays and complete stories, because they must understand that the introduction needs to have certain details that would connect with the conclusion. And I heard one teacher explain it. I can't remember who said it exactly, but the way they explained it was like, and I thought it was a really good explanation, illustration. Um, think of it like you're on a roller coaster ride. When you jump in the roller coaster itself, you start at one point and then you go around, you loop, you do whatever excitement happens, and then you come back to disembark. You're coming back to right where you started in order to disembark. And so when you think of it that way, it's pretty much like a loop and you're coming back. So whatever happens, the loop might make twists and turns or upside down and all those, interesting, fun stuff that you do with setting and character and the rising action and all those things. But you are coming back to the starting point. And so in order to be able to do that, your starting point needs to have something in it that you could come back to. And so the best way to do this really is to have the main character have like an attitude or some sort of behavior or an opinion that would change based on the result of the story itself and the experiences. So let's say you're looking at the main character being a mean person. Like I had a student, we were discussing a story, and it was, I think the story was, right about the time you were turned into a dog. Yeah, some really interesting prompts out here. Um, but what was the reason for being turned into a dog? And what would be the lesson coming out of that? So, if we do that, for example, then at the beginning, maybe the character was mean to dogs. And that's the situation that we discussed in that particular story. The character was mean to the dogs. And because of that, she was turned into a dog and she had some experiences. And then she realized that she was mean and she needed to not be that way. And then as the realization hit her, then she was turned back into a human and now she's kind to dogs. So, but that lesson is not going to make as much sense if it is we don't have something in the introduction that leads to it. We could have a child maybe thinking that their parents aren't don't care about them, but then they get into trouble and the parents just and save them, and they realize, yeah, my parents really care after all. Or they believe that it's okay to steal, and so they steal and then they get punished, and then they realize, hey, stealing is wrong. And so we want to have that kind of situation coming out in the lesson learned. And so, therefore, having something in the introduction that connects with it, you could have it stated outright or have it, hinted, but it really needs to have something in that introduction, which is why when we write introductions, we talk about background information. Yes, we're introducing character. Yes, we're introducing setting. Yes, we must have a hook, but there must be this background information that gives a little bit about what the character wants, maybe why they want it, and so on. Maybe the character could feel themselves as a coward and then they do things that surprise them and realize, hey, I'm braver than I think. So they could learn something about themselves. And, so we have all of these situations that could have that lesson learned connect with the introduction. And so, which is why, like I said, we want to have this plan and this plot before we begin writing. And so with practice, students will get it. They're not going to get it right away. But with practice, they would start thinking along those lines. Okay, what's the message I want to send here? What do I want readers to learn? And so if they are stumped for ideas, a great way to start with these lessons learned would be to think about cliches. It's not the place to stay, but it's an awesome place to begin because with practice, the students could come up with their own unique spin on the cliches, I guess, and more fitting to the situation. So, let's say, all that glitters is not gold. So something happens and the child finds something and they decide, you know what, I'm going after this because it's shiny and it's new and they want this thing and they have to get it. And then they realize, it's not what I expected. Turns out not the way I wanted it to. And so therefore, you know what? Not everything that looks good is good, and so on. So even with the attitude toward the thing, we can have that whole lesson learned being primed in the introduction. I think that's the best way to look at it. You're priming the foundation for that lesson by what you say in the introduction and second paragraphs of the story, because that's where you really get a sense of what's going on with the character, and therefore you kind of think, okay, yeah, this is how they're going to change, and this is how this story has changed them. So in the beginning, it'll be kind of predictable, but as students practice, and this is something that I help my students understand, it gets less predictable so the story doesn't feel cliche in and of itself, but you do get some, unique and fresh ideas on specific situations. And this is another reason why you want to focus on this specific situation. You don't want to talk about a whole lot of things happening because then you're opening up yourself to several lessons. You want to focus on this one situation that taught this one lesson. And that is why we're keeping it to that micro focus flash fiction of this one lesson. It helps guide the story, makes the story make sense, and makes it feel a lot more complete. Right? So what are you working on this week? Definitely thinking about what that lesson learned is all about, reading some sample stories to see how they show up. We want to make sure that students recognize ways to introduce it in the introduction. And that's just first session. So you're spending like 20, 30 minutes discussing that, looking at the lessons learned and see how they fit within the context and how they relate to the experiences of the story. Then you're looking at how they are created. So maybe you want to brainstorm a few lessons, make a list of some cliches, or um, what do they call that? It's slipping me. The term is slipping me, but so you want to start making a list of these sayings that can be used for lessons learned. So you brainstorm. So in that second session, 20 to 30 minutes, have the student brainstorm a few. If they can't come up with any, you want to end up at the end of that session with a thorough understanding of about 15. And so if the student can't come up with any, you come prepared with about 15 that you can go through, make sure they understand, and see how, what sort of situations a character could go through in order to learn that lesson. And in the third session that you're spending, you want to brainstorm with some prompts. So now you have a list of prompts. You could have a list of maybe, I would say, in a 20 to 30-minute session, you might want to look at 10 prompts and see what lessons can be learned from those 10 prompts. So when you read this prompt, what comes to mind in terms of the experience that this character would go through based on this prompt? And let's make a list of 2 to 3. If you can get 3, that's awesome. Lessons that could come out of this. And then decide which one is most appropriate and which one would be best for the situation. Right? And so that whole activity does a couple things. It helps the students come up with lessons from prompts and experiences that they might relate to. And then it also helps them make decisions about which ones to go to. Because many situations you can get lots of lessons, but which one would be most appropriate and most fitting? It helps students make that critical decision there as well. And so, which is, as a reminder, we talk a lot about creative writing, bringing out a student's creativity and imagination, but it's something that I've said before. So if you've been following, you've heard me say it. But just if you're new, note this: creative writing also helps students with their critical thinking because they have to make decisions about what to include, when to include it, what is most appropriate, how many descriptions to use, because yes, there is such a thing as too many descriptions. And because remember, this is narration balanced with description, description balanced with narration. It's not just a descriptive piece, it is a narrative, which means that we need to have that plot happening too. But if we spend too much time on the description, that's going to take away from the plot and plot development. So there's a balance that's needed here. And there's a lot of critical thinking going into making those kinds of decisions. So this is something that we really want to pay attention to. And this is how we allow students to analyze situations, give them the tools they need to make these critical decisions for their writing. And guess what? With practice and with habit being formed, it's going to translate into other things. So, if you've ever been wondering about how to develop a child's critical thinking skills, this is one of the fun ways to do it. All right, so that's your agenda for the narratives this week. Remember, lessons learned have to focus on the main character. The lesson is a result of the experiences, so it has to be related to the experience. And because of that, it's going to be connected to the introduction. And we're brainstorming and reviewing ways that we could lay that foundation in the introduction to get to the lesson learned. And how we do that is by giving the character personality flaw, um, an erroneous opinion or attitude, or have them, a belief that would be changed throughout the situation, or maybe just ignorance. They didn't know, and based on the experience, now they know. So even that sets the stage for a good lesson learned. All right, so that is it for narratives this week. And now we're going on to poetry. And this week with poetry, we're looking at poetry questions. So if this is your first live and you missed last week, go back and check out last week because last week deals with the elements of poetry and different things to understand. Main one being a poem is a story and it's written in a specific way, but ultimately it's a story being told in poetic format. And so that's a key foundation to get students to understand. You want some ideas on how to get them to understand that? Check out last week's episode. This week we're going into questions, but excuse me, before we do that, I'm kind of this is part of a poem that I wrote and I'm kind of proud of it. It's just part of it. And yes, I do write poetry. When I create my worksheets for students in the comprehension class, I do original stories, original articles, and original poetry so that um, they can get a variety. So, like this one, I specifically wrote the poem in a way that it does not rhyme because a lot of students get into the understanding and habit of poems have to rhyme, but poems don't have to rhyme. And I mentioned that last week, so I thought it would be a good idea to share with you. So, this particular poem, remember I said poems are stories. The story in this particular poem is a boy playing in the park with his dog, and the dog gets distracted and runs off. And he kind of panics as the dog runs off because he couldn't find the dog, and then they reunite in the end. So, that's the story. Very simple story, but something that a lot of people could relate to in terms of, you have a pet and they disappear and you kind of thing. And so it makes for an interesting poem that students can relate to. So I'm just going to read. This is the first two stanzas, and notice the stanzas are also not mirrored in terms of 4 lines each. We have one with three, one with five, and so a stanza in a poem kind of functions the way that a paragraph would function in a story, in a narrative. And so we use the stanzas to focus on content. Sometimes it spills over, and of course, it will spill over because it's a continuous story. But, we can guide readers towards certain sections by grouping it. So in this case, the first stanza is just the poet, the speaker, um, you know, observing what's around there at the park. And then the second is the action that leads to the issue. And then the rest of it will be going through the issue and all the emotions that happen, and then reuniting with the dog. And so this is part of the poem that I have in my comprehension package. I'm finished with the comprehension package. It's available. So if you want to get a copy, that package has eight comprehension worksheets, two fiction, two nonfiction, two poems, and two graphics. And like I said, all original creations that as closely as possible mirror um the past papers, because I do study the past papers a lot in terms of the questions that are asked, the format and the structure of the kinds of texts and graphics that students are exposed to. And so I go through that. And so this has those details plus, of course, how I do things. I'm not going to just give you the practice alone, but I do have some notes on graphics, poems, comprehension with fiction and nonfiction as well. So you could know what to remind students of when you go through the worksheets with them. All right. So let me just read this and then we will move on to what we're talking about, which is really poetry questions today. The park hummed with life, leaves whispered secrets in the breeze. Children shrieked like joyful birds playing all around. I launched the red ball like a fiery streak across the sunny grass. Max, my golden rocket, torpedoed after it, a blur of wagging tail and floppy ears. Then a flash, a twitchy brown shadow, a squirrel taunting fate. Now, of course, you can imagine what happened, right? If a squirrel runs across a dog's path, I mean, he's a dog, right? So he's going to go after it. And so you can even use something like this to help students, start predicting the story. So when you're teaching poetry and you're dealing with poetry comprehension, you can even give like the first part of the poem and ask the students to predict what's going to happen in the rest of it. And so this is another way to engage them with the poetry and help them understand how poetry works and the fact that a poem is a story. So let's have some ideas here on what you can do. Now, let's see. So based on the questions that I've studied in terms of the past papers. And of course, if you don't have a copy of the past papers yet, please do get a copy, because if you're going to be going through comprehension, it's not necessarily that you want to give your students the past papers to do yet, but you do want to be able to understand what kinds of questions you get with the different types of comprehension texts and graphic that students would be exposed to. So if you want to get that in a nutshell, then definitely get a copy of the 8 comprehension worksheets plus the details. One of the things I did with the details is to itemize, make a list of the various types of questions that students can encounter. And so, definitely with the poetry, you get questions based on content, focus on the elements, and about characters and their feelings. Very similar to the fiction, like I said, because remember, poem is a story. You get the vocabulary questions, you get explain this line, You get, how does the poet feel about things? Um, and then remember in a story, you would have a speaker, that's the narrator, the person writing. You can have characters if the character is not the same as the person speaking. You can actually have the poet character speaking to another character in poems. So these are some things to consider as you go through. But again, get a copy of the past papers. I know on the Ministry of Education's website under primary school resources, you get 2020, 21, 22, and 23. You get those four there. I also have on my website 2019 and 2024. So if you want to get a copy of that, I'll put a link in the chat eventually, but you can just message me, get a copy, or go to my website, Journey to SEA 2025. When you click on that, you'll see all the videos there archived, but also on the right hand column. If you scroll down just a little bit, it might be on the first page, but if you scroll down just a little bit, you would see a link to click. You'd get a copy of the past papers, right? So make sure and get a copy of that and start looking at the questions. The way the questions are phrased, the way they are structured, the kinds of questions. So while I know for fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, you get 7 questions each. But when you look over the space of the 5 years, you'd realize that some questions recur and you always get them. The vocabulary and explain the line, those questions always come. You will always get a question, something about the actual content, like what is happening in the story. So you'd get a question on that or two. You will also get questions on mood. And I've noticed recently, as in the 2023 and 2024, both poetry questions asked about creating a title for the poem. And so that is something that students really do need to practice. So in my worksheet, I did the same both times. s- Um, you know, Suggest a suitable title for the poem, give a reason for your answer. That's how that question is framed. And so students really do need to get into the habit of understanding how to create poem titles and always having a reason for their answers. Having a reason for their answer is not always something that students do. They kind of just, it comes to them, they put it there. But this is another aspect of developing critical thinking. So there are lots of different ways education develops critical thinking that we often don't pay attention to. And being able to have reasons for our answers is one of them. Every answer a student gives, they must have a reason for it. Whether the question asks for a reason or not, they must have evidence, support, or a valid, reasonable information, details, something that they're basing their answers on. And so we really want to get that done with the poetry as well. So this week, what you're doing is going through the questions. What I have my students do, I give them a poem and I have them create questions. So we study the questions, we go through the list. This is a list of, I think we came to like about maybe 11 or 12 different kinds of questions. And then some of them can be grouped, but character questions, etc. And then I give them a poem and I have them create their own poem, their own questions. And then we review the questions that they've created and we answer them, following with the poem. So it helps them see it from both sides and multiple avenues. And that is something that I think is quite useful. So that's what you're doing this week, looking at the questions, having students create questions if you can, definitely studying the different types of questions and, what kinds of questions can be created. Exactly. So really, yeah. So first session, reviewing the questions, making sure you have that list. Second session, creating own questions. You could go through with the student to create questions. And then third session, having the student create their own questions, and then you answer them. And that would help them really understand stuff. All right, so I think that's it for this session. Before I go, it would be remiss of me if I don't remind you that this August I'm doing the most compact and um, intensive sessions that I've done before since I started, because I'm including a lot more resources. I'm learning that, yes, having someone work with you is good, but what do you do outside of class? A teacher can't be with the student all the time. A teacher can't give every single detail. So what we need is more worksheets and materials to work with. So that's why I'm taking July off to create more of those. But I already have quite a bit that I've used with my students. So I have them included in these sessions. So for the report writing session, you're getting the textbook and the sessions recorded, plus some sample reports. In the narrative writing session, you're getting the digital booklets that go subgenre in terms of we get a science fiction, a fantasy, mystery, and so on. And which reminds me, I'm revising all the stories and all the reports because I've learned a lot in my teaching and in interacting with students so that I have even greater clarity now. So I'm adding to these booklets in terms of some worksheets and so on. So if you want to get a copy of that, and you want to get all the extras, enroll in the program. Otherwise, from September, all these materials will be available for individual purchase because by then I would have done and completed the revision. For the mastering comprehension, you're getting 16 practice exercises. So the 8 that I spoke about that I already have available, plus I'm creating another 8 that would be used in the program. So there's an entrance, an exit where you would get 4 each, and then during the program, we'd be using um, another 8 unique poems, graphics, etc., etc. Plus, you get a copy of the 2019 to 2024 ELA answers. If you don't already have a copy, then this is an excellent way. So it's like I tried to overload it with value because I know that it's 1 month. And when you're finished with this, what are you going to do continuing? You would have the materials that you'd be able to work with. Of course, I'll be having courses in September, but remember, you want to be able to do some work at home with your students because this is where you really get the benefits. The students that excel are the ones that get that continuous practice. And a teacher, even in class every day, cannot give continuous practice on everything because remember, they're doing math and the language, grammar, etc., spelling, and all those things. And they still have social studies and science because we do need context for a lot of these things. So you want to have your revision schedule, which would be if you don't have one yet, you can download the schedule for the lives, get the revision schedule, and set up your own timetable to get that done. And then you would have the materials to work with. So consider it. The link would be in SEA Peacefield. It's on um, the Word Coach Youth Facebook page. Of course, you can always WhatsApp me 717-4993. I haven't put up my number in a while. 717-4993. And let me just put that on screen. So just in case you want to be able to see that, right? 717-4993. You can WhatsApp me and I'll send you the link for registration. Or you can just, go to my website, Word Coach Limited, and look for classes, courses. Um, yeah, you would see all of them there, registration form online, and so on. So that is it for us today. Thank you so much for those of you who were able to stick it out through the live. I try to keep it within an hour, but sometimes when I have some preliminary things to say, it runs a little bit over. But thank you for sticking around. If you're looking at the replay, I appreciate you. Send your questions, your comments. Remember, I base a lot of what I discuss with you not only on what I teach, but also the questions that students ask me and what parents ask as well. Because I know that these are the things that you want to know about, that you need to know about to give your child or your students the best foundation. So let me know, send me a message. I'd really love to hear from you. I'd also like to know if you think the sessions are helpful. Give me a review. Go to my Facebook page and say whether or not you think it's helpful. Reviews actually help those who don't know about the program, help them find it. It helps them find it and it helps them understand what parents are getting from it. I could say what I think you would be getting from it, but only you can say what you actually got from it. So, make a comment, send a message to let everyone know if you think it's helpful and that it will help others. Let them know. Share it with the parents in your child's class, share it with other teachers. My agenda is really to be as useful and as helpful as possible. I think that's the purpose I've been put on this earth for because one of my gifts is explanations and being able to guide people in terms of studying. So this is how I choose to use that and to express it. So let as many people know as possible. Subscribe to the channel on YouTube so that you'd get that notification when new videos are up. But I'm here every Tuesday, so come check us out again next week, and we'll be talking more about reports, narratives, and comprehension. So definitely have a good one. And I look forward to July when I could really get some of those resources completed. If you're looking for a specific resource that you can't find and you wish somebody would create something, let me know because I'm also working on vocabulary. So be doing comprehension, reports, narratives, and I'm putting together vocabulary worksheets as well. So if you want one on grammar, maybe something specific, let me know. I'll add it to the list and you would see it soon. Okay? So have a good one and see you next week. Bye bye.